First item on the agenda is the safety in public places. I believe Chief Bradshaw is going to lead us off.
Thank you, Mrs. Hensley, Mr. Manager, members of the council. Judy Bradshaw, Chief of Police. I'd first like to recognize a couple of guests that are here this morning. We have Sheriff Bill McCarthy from the Polk County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff, thanks for being here. And Tom Earhart, the Des Moines Public Schools Superintendent, is here. And then I'm going to have those internally that worked on this report with me stand up, and if you could, just introduce yourselves and where you work, if you could. What assignment?
Major Steve Waymeyer. I'm in charge of the Investigations Division.
Chuck Gould, I work for the Neighborhood-Based Service Delivery, and I'm also one of the firearms instructors for the department.
Joe Leo, Sergeant, Crimes Against Persons Section.
Sergeant Lily Miller, Supervisor of School Resource Officers.
Kelly?
Officer Kelly Drain. I am with the Mobile Crisis Response Team.
Captain Todd Dykstra, Special Students. Sergeant Jason Halifax, I'm a Public Information Officer, also a firearms instructor.
And one other person?
Anna Kingery, I'm Chief Bradshaw's Administrative Assistant.
Thank you very much. This question that is posed up there before you was asked probably by every community after the Newtown, Connecticut shooting. And one of the things that we did when we were charged by the mayor and the council, by you all, to look at and answer this question: how prepared are we in the metro area to prevent and respond and really manage the aftermath of any type of a mass shooting or violence. We believe that there are indicators within a community that any community in this country can use to determine its level of vulnerability. One of the first indicators that we looked at in our community is obviously the area of mental health and the existence of a mobile crisis unit. Not all states have this concept embraced by law enforcement. There's only about a handful, and Iowa is one of them. But within the state of Iowa, there are only 2 counties, Polk and Dallas, that have a mobile crisis team. We think the existence of this team helps diminish our vulnerability. Also, second, the existence of the Metro Star Response Team, or a Homeland Security regional approach to training with the schools, training in the schools, training with businesses. We believe that this regional approach in this county with the training in schools and of school personnel helps us to be prepared to prevent this kind of violence. Existence of a school resource officers within our high schools and our middle schools. Currently, we have school resource officers in our high schools. We've talked with the schools. We work with them, partner with them extensively. We'd like to expand that program so that all schools in Des Moines are covered by school resource officers. We also looked at school infrastructure and entrance hardening. You know, 60 years ago, when most of the Des Moines schools were built, they were built for public access. And they were built for a lot of people coming in and a lot of people leaving. No one thought about an armed gunman walking into a kindergarten class with an assault weapon. No one thought about anybody with guns coming in and having to protect students or staff. And so today, as communities are building schools and as they are looking at how do we make our public buildings safe, hardening the entrances and thinking about security to very old public buildings, City Hall included, and many other city buildings, and certainly our schools, should be a goal, and that is a goal of the Des Moines Public Schools. But it's going to take time, and obviously it's going to take that part of the budget, commitment to that. Adequate jail assessment and evaluations for arrestees. For those that enter into the jails, those that are arrested, and there's a small portion of them, we think that any community that has adequate jail assessment and evaluations for the mentally ill, they allow these folks to get stabilized. And they allow these folks, and you'll see this as we walk through the report, they allow the arrestees with mental health issues to get stabilized while they are in that institution. And so you hear sheriffs and you hear law enforcement say that our jails are the largest mental health facility in the country. And we've all thought before, well, this person's going to jail. Maybe now they'll get the mental health services that they need. Think about it. We've all thought that way. Maybe now they'll get those services. 30 years ago, before they deinstitutionalized the mental health institutions, we didn't think that way. No one thought that you had to be arrested to get help for mental health issues. And that thinking is wrong, but that thinking is very accurate. In today's community, those that have access to mental health or that don't, or that are poor and they don't have the resources for mental health, they should not have to be arrested in order to get appropriate mental health services. We also believe that adequate funding of mental health core services at the state and county levels is essential. Not just for those that have been incarcerated or will be, but for those in our communities. And then we believe that balanced gun control laws at the federal and state levels need to be in place, and then programs designed to create awareness. So after 9/11 and after a series of shootings, we took a look at the firearms laws. There are a lot of laws out there that address guns and regulations. And this slide just shows at the federal level, the Gun Control Act. And I'm not going to read all of this, but there are 478 different parts to this Federal Gun Act. There are 818 separate regulations. There are a lot of federal regulations as they pertain to guns. The state of Iowa has over 40 state statutes relating to guns. And then the city also has a blanket of ordinances that pertains to guns and carrying weapons in the city. That last bullet really is highlighted. This is sort of a paint by numbers, so out of due respect, just be patient if you will. The last bullet really talks about political subdivisions or cities. And what it does is it prohibits any city to go further than what is already lawful under the state and under the federal government. This next slide talks about how do you purchase a handgun in the state of Iowa. When you decide to purchase a gun in Iowa, you must be an Iowa resident first in order to get a permit to acquire or a permit to purchase or a permit to carry. So the person that wants to do it the legal way, the right way, goes to their local sheriff. They apply for the permits. The sheriffs take about 30 days to do background checks. And what they're looking for felonies, they're looking for court-ordered mental health commitments, and in Iowa, for domestic assault convictions. Those things, if you have those, can restrict you from getting a permit. The next thing that happens once you have this permit is you have 3 ways to purchase a gun. You can go to a gun store, whether it's a Walmart or whether it's a gun store where they sell weapons. You can go to a gun show, or you can purchase a weapon by private sale. And that walks you through the 3 methods. If you go to the gun store, that person behind the counter is going to have an FFL, or the Federal Firearms License Dealership. If you go to a gun show, those set up at the gun shows are going to have an FFL. What happens then is they look at your permit to acquire or your permit that you've received from the sheriff to carry, and then they also perform a check on you. They are required to make a call to this FBI database, which is very similar to what the sheriff has already done, if not the same. And once they call into this number and they get the authorization to sell you a gun, that gun sales happens. Now, these loopholes that people talk about at gun shows, there are, and they allow this at the gun shows, private individuals to come to the gun shows and they can walk the floor with weapons that they would like to sell, and they don't, they're not licensed, they don't have their FFLs, and they're not required to, and they don't necessarily ask you for your permit to acquire or your permit to carry. Be nice if they did, but they don't. That does not always happen. Those kinds of sales, a private party sale, is the loophole that you hear discussed and talked about on a state and a national level. So the profiles of those that are involved in these massive shootings. If you take a look let me first define what we call a mass shooting, and these don't involve any kinds of gun violence or gun shootings under the number 4. So, you know, for purposes of this research and this study, 4 or more is considered a mass shooting. Half of all the mass shooters from that time frame of 1999 through 2012, half of them had a criminal record and had been incarcerated at some point. The other half had no criminal record. But one thing that was largely found in the majority of the cases is that 90% had some type of mental health issue that they were struggling with. Now I'm going to break it up a little bit, and as we talk through this, you know, the phone calls that I received after the last shooting, after Newtown, Connecticut, were from some of you. They were from members of the community, and folks seemed sort of helpless to explain, you know, how are we doing? How do we react? Are we ready? Are we prepared? And I can tell you that in our county and in our city, when you measure us against these indicators, we are poised to prevent and respond to gun violence. And so some of this is assuring you and our community of some of the training that's in place. And I'm going to ask Major Steve Waymeyer to come up and walk us through a couple of slides of what we do every day between Des Moines Public Schools and our police department.
Thanks, Chief. Good morning. Steve Waymeyer, Major Des Moines Police Department. As the Chief said earlier, we're here really to discuss how prepared we are as a community to deal with acts of violence on a widespread scale, and specifically in our schools. We thought it was important for you to know what we do to reach out and train people how to respond to acts of violence, such as what we've seen nationally in Newtown, Connecticut. We have our Metro Star unit goes out and trains community members, businesses, and Des Moines Public Schools. There's a list of a few of the places we've attended or held training for. As you can see, the Des Moines Public Schools are listed. The Jordan Creek Mall specifically asked for some training on how to respond to critical incidents, and Bankers Trust as well. In addition to that, we train all of our officers, every officer, in active shooter, critical incident response, terrorist incident response, and how to clear a room. We're not going to go to a school, respond to a school, and sit outside while we wait and bring our TAC unit in. We're training our people to get and respond and go in and try and save lives. In addition to the training we offer, we also have floor plans for every school in Polk County, in our dispatch center, in our mobile command post, and recently we've added them to our mobile data terminals so that every officer can pull up a floor plan, because if you've been in some of our schools, they're quite extensive, and if you don't know where you're going, you can get lost in a hurry. We also thought it would be important for you to know of the Federal Campus Security Act of 1990. This has to do with our universities, and we have universities here in town that have to abide by this Campus Security Act. If there is a significant emergency in or around the campus, they're required to notify all of their students in their educational community in a real-time basis. The Des Moines Police Department is also the administrator for a fiscal grant for the schools of about $600,000. A list of the schools that have benefited from that grant is included in the slide here. It includes most of the high schools and many of the middle schools and elementary schools. What that grant is used for is equipment. cameras, card readers, locks, two-way communication, just things that go to help make the school safer.
Major?
Yes.
Is it just an oversight that East and Goodrill aren't on this list?
I believe East and Goodrill, that'd be a good question for the superintendent, Mr. Moore, but I believe that they're up to date. That's why. This was to bring everybody up to that standard, but that'd be a great question for the superintendent.
Thank you.
As the chief said, we have schools in our community that on average are 60 years old. We have 61 different public schools with an average age of 60 years old. The school is currently in the process of hardening their entrances and making them safe and secure. In addition to the physical improvements the schools make, they also do an internal training every year for all of their administration staff and parents. And they also discuss their security measures on an annual basis. Since 2008, this slide covers the improvements the schools have made. As you can see, in 2008, there were 34 modular units. In an effort to harden their security measures, that number is down to 15. And security card access is now required at all schools. Cameras have been increased from 37 to 44, and the schools continue to require all employees to wear badges. As a police department, we work closely with the schools. As you know, as the chief said, we have a school resource officer program. There's currently 6 officers assigned to high schools. That's 1 in each high school. We have 2 officers assigned to the 11 middle schools, and we have a sergeant in charge of the squad. Currently, the city pays 40% of the cost associated with the SRO program. The schools pick up the remaining 60%. SROs attend nearly every high school athletic event as well as cultural events and other activities. They also participate in our critical incident training, and they meet on a regular basis with SROs from the surrounding community so that everybody is on the same page.
Thanks, Major. This slide talks about our mobile crisis response team. For those of you that are not familiar with it, this team is critical. It is our a social worker and a police officer, a senior police officer, Kelly Drain, is trained in mental health issues. Her and a social worker go out to assist officers on calls. They're out there nearly 24 hours a day. The team was formed in 2001, and basically, if you think about it, you know, you can contact, if someone in your family is having a mental health crisis, you can contact through the police a mobile crisis team to come to your house and help stabilize your relative or you know, your neighbor and get that person stabilized in the home. That is an incredible program, and it has really benefited our community. When we conducted this research, we found that Newtown, Connecticut, and many others did not have a mobile crisis team. They didn't have access to someone coming into the home, and a lot of times a mobile crisis team goes to the same homes. They're there over and over again. They become familiar with, you know, those in our city that aren't arrested on a regular basis, and they become familiar with those that are arrested on a regular basis, both spectrums that have mental health issues. This is a huge, huge tool for us, and it just cannot go away. This has to be funded year in and year out. I can't say enough about this team. Those are the calls for service. It began back in 2001. It took off sort of slow in 2002, but look at where we're at today. This is just sort of a snapshot of the kinds of mental health services that are offered in Des Moines and in Polk County. There are offshoots from these umbrella organizations. When you talk about mental health services, these are a nice blanket and array of services for our county. Not every county in Iowa has these resources. We also in Polk County have the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. What this council is comprised of are members of the Board of Supervisors, the Polk County Sheriff, the Chief Judge here in Polk County. I also serve as the Chief of Police of Des Moines on this committee. We also have John Sarcone from the County Attorney's Office. We have the Public Defender's Office. We have folks from Probation and Parole. We meet on a monthly basis, and what we talk about is, okay, what kinds of services are offered to those that are arrested and enter into the criminal justice system? So we look at jail diversion programs. We look at mental health assessments for those entering into the criminal justice system, and then how do we better train those in the system? Polk County Emergency Management. When you talk about prevention and when you talk about response, this is one more partner here that can assist us should we have any long-term, let's say we have a long-term crime scene, or we have a crime scene where we need additional resources. We would turn to the Polk County Emergency Management Team and work with them. I think most of you, if not all of you, have been trained, and so you're aware of what this team has to offer out of this office. If you look at the last bulletin, this ALICE, or this Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Escape, they are offering this instructor training, and several of our officers and deputies are attending that training here in April. When you look at the Polk County Sheriff's Office, our Sheriff's Department and our Polk County Jail is head and shoulders above any other jail in this country. And that is by design, and that's by the leadership. All individuals that are booked into the Polk County Jail are assessed by a medical professional, which means that if you have a mental health screening, you're going to have an assessment and potentially some counseling, and a course of treatment is developed by qualified medical professionals. Not all jails in Iowa have that, not all those in the country that have that, but again, this is one more piece to getting folks with mental health issues that enter into the system access to treatment. It's also a fabulous jail diversion program. If you look at individuals with mental health concerns, they can be provided with assistance from a mental health professional while in jail, during the court process, and then after care is arranged prior to being released from custody. These are extraordinary services being offered in our county. And then just a little bit about the state of Iowa and how we fare as a state with mental health. The state's ranked 47th in the number of psychiatrists, 46th for psychologists, 47th in in hospital beds to the mentally ill. Most of those doctors and resources are in the cities. They're in the highly populated areas. Back in 2012, Governor Branstad signed in this Senate File 2315, and I have simplified it for the purposes of this presentation. But what this bill does is it establishes funding for mental health and disability services based on regions rather than counties. What's that mean for Polk County? Well, it means that Polk County, and I know right now discussions are being held to cluster or partner with other counties in order to receive funding from the state. They also have the option of going it alone. But right now what's happened in the state of Iowa, this Senate file did not break up the state into districts or regions. It allowed the counties to cluster together and form these relationships, and then the funding will be funneled down to them in that manner. They have until 2014 to organize and to get themselves regionalized to begin to receive the funding. The key here, then, is that adequate funding continue from the state. Conclusions. Talking with my partner, the Polk County Sheriff, he's drawn these conclusions just from his vast experience, obviously, in law enforcement. All states should be required to report the court-ordered committals to a federal database. This is the database that's checked during the background checks. Iowa does report, but not all states report their information to this database. flexibility to refuse a gun permit, and not just for those adjudicated by the sheriff in each county. That would take a state statute. Mandatory reporting if a gun is lost or stolen. Currently, we have no state statute. If someone has a gun stolen, there's no requirement to report it stolen. The ability for the sheriffs to review the course materials from those that are offering this small arms training. When you go to the sheriff's office to get a permit to carry a weapon, in order to carry that, you have to take a training course. And our sheriff is asking that he be able to at least verify the standards that are being met. Right now, law enforcement is mandated to go and qualify with our service weapons every year. So we have greater restrictions on us as law enforcement officers than the general public does. My recommendations, or my conclusions, I should say. The first is really, and I'm not going to go bullet by bullet, I am currently on the executive committee for the International Association of Chiefs of Police. We are 21,000 members strong. This is a global association. These are our positions. They are found on our website. This is nothing new. These have been on our website for the past 5 years. But I will say that the president of our association and our vice president and our board, we are working very closely with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle and with the White House during this discussion on gun control. On a local level, I'm going to work with the sheriff, and we are going to implement a gun tip line that is directed at students in Polk County, so that when students are in school, if they know that another student has brought a weapon to school, they can text or they can call, and they can get a reward if they call in and we find that there is a student that brought a weapon to school. We're obviously going to partner with the school staff, and we are all on board to begin this program here. We hope to kick it off in spring, but obviously there'll be a big push next fall. I'm also recommending at some point, or I'm concluding, that we increase the number of school resource officers by 4. We currently have 9. I would like us as a city to have a goal of increasing our school resource officers to 13. I'd like to add 1 additional officer to East High School. It's the largest school in the city. 1 officer to Central Campus, and then the 2 additional, how I would use those would be to assign them to middle and elementary schools, so that all Des Moines high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools have a school resource officer assigned to them. We don't have that in place today. And the concept is really going to be similar to the NBSD program. Right now, you know, we have our NBSD officer, but they may have several neighborhoods assigned to them and be available to the leadership in the neighborhood. I'd like to see the same thing done in our schools. We've cost that out at today's cost, the 4 additional officers you see there, $482,000. I have had a discussion with the city manager about the funding and a potential revenue stream. And Mr. Manager, I didn't know if you wanted to make some remarks on that.
Thank you, Chief. Actually, we don't have the funding in our current budget to add the SROs, but it's a great idea. It's an idea that I support. And one of the things I would suggest to the council is that we do receive the red light camera revenue. We're still trying to establish a history, so to speak, in terms of what that revenue stream looks like over time. But in my view, and I think the Chief's view, it is a really good potential source of funding to pay for the additional SROs that come on board. Council has established public safety as an appropriate use of those funds as we establish a history, and they're determined to be a solid source of revenue into the future. But assuming that occurs, there's not legislation that reduces that revenue stream going forward. This would be, in my view, an excellent way to use the funds and fund a program that's very, very important in our community.
Is this our share, or is this the total share, the total cost? This is the total cost, so our share would be 40% of that, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I would add one thing. I think our current policy, and maybe Tom knows more than I do, but I think we have said in the past that additional SROs would be funded 100% by the school.
That's right.
My own recommendation to you, given just the change in circumstances, is that we ought to continue to share in that cost at the 40-60 arrangement that we've had in the past.
Okay.
School campus visits, this is in place right now as we speak. Obviously, after Newtown, we urged our officers when they can to sit in, have high visibility at all of our schools. Become familiar with the schools in your beat, stop in, make your reports while you're sitting in the parking lots there. Just have a lot of visibility. The second piece of this, we have our community ambassadors. We have about 150 in our community. We just ran an academy for all of them. One of the things that came out of that academy is that they offer to be in the schools. I think, that's a great idea. We are beginning to schedule the ambassadors in our schools. They come now into our schools when they're asked. There's some days when we have transitional time periods where we've heard that there's going to be, a fight or there's going to be some sort of conflict. Now, they're not armed, but I can tell you they make a difference. They know a lot of these kids. They go to church with them. They are related to a lot of these kids that get involved in some of the fights and the conflict ahead of time. So this is just our way to put grown-ups in the schools and assisting these kids and being the eyes and ears. Also, the sheriff and I are working with the other chiefs in the county to have a metro area gun turn-in program. We anticipate putting that out Police Week. We'll do a press conference on that and ask for your support in doing that. A lot of people might think, well, you're not going to get gang members that are going to come in and turn their guns in. Well, maybe not, but we do get a lot of guns that get turned in that later, are off the street and not stolen in burglaries. We do have houses that are hit, on a monthly basis that folks have their guns taken. So I think this program, anything we can do to help the community in getting a gun off the street, this program will go a long ways towards that. Also, what we've implemented and really sort of firmed up is a gun crimes investigator. Right now, if you're arrested with a weapon on a drug charge, for instance, that gun, you're charged with having that gun, and you're charged with the drug charge. And we do the appropriate traces and tracks, but we can tighten that up, I can tell you, as an organization. We can partner up with the ATF. We can track that gun in all other gun-related kinds of crimes. And we can just do a better job of tracking all the gun-related offenses as well. So in place today, we have a gun crimes investigator, and Major Waymeyer is currently assigned to the Detective Bureau and has put that in place. Continued support and funding for the Mobile Crisis Response Team. That is done. It's currently funded by Polk County Health Services, Medicaid for the poor that take advantage of this team, and the Des Moines Police Department. We do that through our officer that I've committed as a resource.
Judy, what is the total cost of that program? The budget? I mean, do we?
I don't know.
It's about $450,000 a year.
Okay.
$450,000. Critical incident training. We just graduated a class of recruit officers that are trained in this. It is our goal to begin training. We're going to have, I think training is set for April. We're going to begin to train all of our school resource officers and slowly train all the officers within our department for this critical incident training. I know the sheriff is also beginning to train his deputies. He's got members of his staff that are trained in this. So we're working together to get our folks trained. School Resource Officer Program, I just covered that and what my conclusions are. We're going to continue to partner and have a great relationship with the Des Moines Public Schools, in large part because of Tom Earhart and his leadership there. Homeland Security Agreement, continued support from the county and the suburbs. This is critical. I know that the suburbs are saddled for budgets just as we are, but this is a critical piece to assessing how vulnerable are you in preventing and your ability to respond to any kind of violence in the schools and in your public venues.
Can I just interrupt there for just a second, Chief? The Homeland Security Agreement is something the City Council pioneered some years ago. It is a great approach where, in effect, that Homeland Security cost is shared to some extent with our suburban and county friends. It nets out for the city, I think, a little under $400,000 a year, if I remember. The total cost of the program is significantly greater than that. Right. But it is a good way to share that cost of Homeland Security arrangements. My concern, Mayor and Council, is that we have some indication from suburbs that they want to terminate that participation. In my view, that would be a huge mistake. It'd be a step backwards on not only the Homeland Security agreement that we have, but also on the whole notion of collaboration that we've tried to foster so long and so hard. So I just wanted to give you some indication that that was on the table with some folks, and I think we had to do what we can to make sure that doesn't happen.
Rick, is that on the table right now during this budget season? Or is this something that we're looking to the future? And I guess based upon the fact that it was a key issue through the Metro Advisory Council, that this needs to be a topic?
Mrs. Hensley, council members, I think that would be appropriate. I just received an indication within the week that there was some interest on the part of some of our suburbs that want to terminate the agreement. So I can't tell you what their notion is in terms of when they want to do that, but it's clearly in their thinking. So the MAC would be a place to do it, or other approaches as you might see as being appropriate.
Okay.
And this is just a summary again of the indicators that we used for how vulnerable we are. You know, as we sat down and we talked to the schools, it was Mr. Earhart that pointed out that probably, you know, as in his research and looking at the kinds of communities that get hit with gun violence, it's the smaller communities. You know, the Newtown Connecticut's, the smaller communities. It's not the Des Moines, Iowas necessarily. It's not the Philadelphias, but we are all vulnerable. We cannot prevent this in its entirety. I think we all know that. So the best that we can do as leaders in the community to provide the safety is to look at those you know, indicators and those variables that contribute to making a healthy, safe community. Mental health is a piece of it. And certainly the resources in law enforcement and in the county, the partnerships that we build. So that's our report. I know it's lengthy. There's a summary that follows. There's addendums, but I would open it up for any questions that you might have. Yes, sir.
Judy, are there background checks on community ambassadors?
Are we doing that? I don't think we are. We have worked through the faith-based community. They're members of the churches. We haven't done the background checks.
I just want to make sure before we let people into schools in that capacity that, you know, we're not allowing sex offenders or criminals by themselves in. It's my understanding on from looking at laws related to guns that the feds have taken a lackadaisical approach to enforcement on both domestic, removing guns from domestic violence abusers, and also a federal law against felons in possession. Has that been your experience, or?
No. Do you know of a particular case that you're talking about, or that you can reference?
It was my experience several years ago, and maybe this has changed, that there's always been a backlog that in a communication issue with the feds, because it's a federal law, and local law enforcement when they remove guns from somebody that's committed domestic violence or felons in possession. Has that not been the case?
No.
Okay.
You know, the sheriff's offices and the deputies are charged with that in Iowa. So, you know, you can't look to even though it's the federal law, in the state of Iowa, those are court orders, you know. In other words, you're convicted of domestic abuse and the court finds that you will do these things. That comes from a local court, and so your local jurisdictions are the ones going out and retrieving those weapons, not the feds, not the federal government.
That's what I needed. Thanks. Thanks for answering.
Judy, excellent report. Thank you very much. Are we going to be making this presentation to the school board and to the Board of Supervisors? I mean, I know that we asked for it, but based upon the teamwork and the partnering that's been done with schools and the sheriff, it seems like it would be a natural evolution of the process to sit down and have this presentation with those bodies as well. So is that the plan, or?
Yes.
It is.
You know, potentially. It's one of those that I'm going to offer up and certainly be happy to present it to those bodies as well. Okay. And to your point, if I may, I'd like to allow my guests to make a couple comments, you know, before we conclude and before any other questions if they want to. Sure.
Bill McCarthy, Polk County Sheriff. Just a couple comments. One, I want to really acknowledge the work that Chief Bradshaw and her folks did on this. Very impressive report. It's as comprehensive as anything I've seen, and I think it helps people understand, you know, some of the issues and breaks it out in a way that that we can all digest. I also want to acknowledge the superintendent, and I probably shouldn't say this, but that his presence would not have existed 10 years ago, and to me it's pretty impressive. I know the things that the chief talked about seem to you and to me and probably to this audience to be very moderate, reasonable things. But I can tell you there are constituencies that would oppose every single word in this report, and they are very active. And if we're interested in some common sense approach to this issue, we're all going to have to let our voices be heard. And with that, I thank you very much, and I thank the chief and the city manager for inviting me to participate.
Sheriff, would you be willing to answer a couple of questions?
Yes, sir.
You're sort of the focal point in terms of issuing
Yeah.
permits.
I didn't know that.
And are there things that could happen that would help you further scrutinize those who get licenses? A couple things come to mind, a couple of which Brian talked about in a minute ago, but are you finding a relation, and I guess I would ask the chief as well, between incidents with guns, either nationally or locally, that are related to people that had a troubled youth, had alcohol issues like DUIs, had not aggravated assaults, but things that would be held generally in civil cases? I mean, are you seeing that there's a relationship between some of those things and people with guns, and that maybe those should also be shared and included in your background checks that maybe at this point are not?
I got to answer that two ways. I was thinking the other day about myself. I joined the United States Marine Corps when I was 17. I've had a gun in my possession my entire adult life, from the Marine Corps all the way through my experience at the sheriff's office, then here, and then back at the sheriff's office. I believe in the Second Amendment, whatever that means when you say it that way. I'm not a radical in my beliefs, but I believe that people have a right to self-protection and access to a gun and this and that.
Right.
But there's no question the literature indicates a correlation between what you say and the problems that exist at different points in a person's life. That's on the margin. And the one good area I feel about, and at Polk County we talk in terms of the code, the courts look at a 222, which is mental issues, a 229, which is hospitalization of those issues, and a 125, which is substance abuse, and we refer to it that way. And the system is moving in the right direction. It's maybe not as fast as we want it to go, but the system as a whole is moving to hold those folks accountable, at least in terms of our ability to deny a permit. We're not there yet fully, but it is, there's a consensus and we're getting there. So I think you can feel good about that in answer to the question you asked, Mr. Mayor.
If we had any ability to influence anybody to help you in that regard, would you suggest that it's more at the state level or at the federal level that would give you the ability to share more information in terms of what you use to background check people who are applying for permits?
Well, the state recently made changes last year that really weakened our position at the local level dramatically. And I'm asking for that back. It ain't going to happen, but it doesn't hurt to ask. At least it draws attention. We were, I think, as a country, slowly moving with our heads in the clouds towards the idiocy that exists in Alaska, where there is no restriction whatsoever. And there's even penalties for somebody asking you about your situation if you have a gun. That stopped. So that's good. That's stopped. That's froze. And I don't think we're going to hear that kind of talk except on the margins. But yeah, I want to have some local control because we know things about people that the state and the feds aren't going to know. Secondly, I don't want to have training that's fabricated or phony. It's just like the chief said. It shocks me to think that the only people held accountable to develop and display a training proficiency are law enforcement people. What kind of insanity is that? And on and on and on. But she's articulated everything we feel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody have any other questions?
Sheriff, I had one other question, and this might be for you as well as Chief Bradshaw. Have we seen an increase, and I don't know if you've got the hard numbers with you, since the state changed the law last year in terms of gun violence? Have we seen a dramatic increase?
In my judgment, no, we have not.
Pretty consistent? Has it gone down?
Pretty consistent. Okay. It's just that we've got folks that have guns that have never fired the gun they
Sure.
have. They don't know how to make it safe. They don't know how to load it. They don't know how to buy the ammo for it. It's just silliness.
Sure.
We all know a gun is a potentially dangerous instrument. And that's the condition we find ourselves in. Again, not with most, but with a margin.
Sure. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Clark, and City Council, just a couple of remarks. I want to just express gratitude for the Chief Bradshaw and the rest of the department. I think Des Moines Public Schools and the police department have a very healthy collaborative relationship, not just in terms of the SROs, which I agree we would benefit from expanding that program, but also the mobile crisis response team. Although that's not designed specifically for schools, we do run into circumstances now and again when we're serving the vast majority of the students in the city and those families that sometimes the necessity for that program manifests itself in our schools. And the mobile crisis response team has also just done a magnificent job of being prompt, efficient, and very professional in helping us deal with some of the most challenging situations that we find with some of our students and families. Finally, I just want to reiterate, Chief Bradshaw mentioned the average age of our school buildings in Des Moines is just at about 63 years old, designed for a different time in our history. We take that very seriously. Each year we renovate approximately a half dozen buildings, and security is absolutely one of the top priorities in each of those renovation projects. So I think if you visit our schools, even some of our most elderly buildings, we've made some very good progress in ensuring that we have more secure entry and are able to keep our schools and students safer, but also collaborate more successfully with local officials. So thanks for examining this issue. We will be bringing it to our board hopefully early this spring.
Question.
Yeah.
The chief talked about the school resource officers at length, and I know, you know, you can't make a commitment here, but it seems like that would be a natural next step out of the report. So as you're looking at your budget, do you have thoughts as to what direction you may go?
Yes, yes. We'll be proposing a budget to our board here in the next couple of weeks, and expanding that program will be a part of that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor or members of the council, any other questions?
Anything else?
Just one other, mental health, going back to your whole report, it was just filled with references to the mental health issues that we encounter. And I know that's not something that we at our level, at the city level, have funding for. But I see potentially, as we're talking about legislative update, you know, I understand it's the county's role to go out and secure that funding, but we need to be in a supportive role would be my reaction, and just how, you know, how best to do that. We have a lot of other issues on our plate. I'm not asking that we be the lead, but from my perspective, I know it's important that we play a supporting role in that, and I think we need to have some discussion about that.
If I could, Mr. Mayor, council members, two points. Number one, we do fund some of it. Officer Drain out here that the chief mentioned is city funded, so we have that contribution to the resource. But the mental health professional is a cost absorbed by Polk County. My suggestion would be that we reach out to Polk County, to the board, and find out from them what their legislative agenda looks like, and see if we can support that. I think your point is a really good one.
Right. I
think we had to try to work through the county on that.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief, a couple other questions I had, if that's okay, Mayor.
Yes.
I agree with Councilman Hensley. I think this is phenomenal information. Just the two questions I had, you had listed the gun tip line as well as the gun buyback program. You didn't necessarily mention funding of that, and I was just curious how that was
Going to work?
going to work.
Okay. Thank you for those questions. The Crime Stoppers is, that will go through the Polk County Dispatch Center. Right now, the Crime Stoppers is really funded by volunteers, and they receive their money through donations. And the sheriff's office, you know, houses the software and commits that resource, that dispatcher, to answering those calls. This will go through the same notion. They'll go in through the Polk County Dispatcher. That student will be able to say if they're calling from Ankeny or Des Moines or out in the county, and then that information will be funneled to that jurisdiction. So that's how that will work. It will not take, we don't anticipate any additional funding. You referred to the gun turn-in, not a gun buyback. I'm not going to buy a gun. I'm not going to encourage people to come in or steal a weapon to turn it in. I don't have a budget for that, and I'm not going to do that. However, we've had these gun turn-in programs in the past. I will support the sheriff and I believe we can get every Metro chief on board, a gun turn-in program. Those we're going to do during Police Week, and we have resources committed to community events and efforts, and so that will not be at a cost. The cost will be to, you know, the resources, our own personnel.
Great, thank you. Great information.
Thank you.
Chief, one other question. As I skim over your Iowa handgun purchase process, the reality of it is when they do the first part, somebody decides to purchase a gun, they can pretty much skip the first 3 or 4 pieces, especially if they go to private party sales or internet sales.
Yes, sir.
And so they can just acquire, they've got it, we don't know it, they have no permit. What are the penalties for anybody who gets it through that method who otherwise couldn't or shouldn't or?
For not having the permit to acquire or to carry.
Right.
You know, I'm going to defer to my experts. Who wants to field that one? Sergeant, come on up.
Sergeant Jason Halifax, Des Moines PD Public Information Officer. Basically, the way the code reads, I'll just go through it real quick too. If you're going to buy from FFL, licensed dealer, you will get a background check. If you buy from anyone else on the council privately for a long gun, there will be no requirement for a background check. For a handgun, you're required to get a permit yourself, and they're required to make sure you have it. Without that permit, that's the violation. I believe it's a serious misdemeanor right now. It's prosecutable. It's just difficult to follow up with that one.
Long gun could include an assault rifle with a 100-round clip?
That's correct.
So I wouldn't necessarily have to have anything to purchase something like that?
From a private party, no. From a dealer, you will get a background check.
Okay, so since there is no real requirement to do that, there really is no penalty for having, holding, or owning that sort of a weapon. Is that correct?
That's correct, with long guns, yes.
Okay.
Unless you're a felon. Then
Well-
there's an issue there, but without that, no.
Okay.
Sergeant, how many weapons a year can a private party sell before they trigger having to have a federal license?
I'm not certain what that is. It's a ATF requirement, but I'm not sure what that number is.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for the presentation and getting on top of this. As you all know, public safety is all of our #1 jobs as we serve in public office and you serving our citizens. So thank you for your work, and let's continue to work together. Chief, good to see you. And Sheriff, good to see you. If there's no further questions at the moment, let's quickly jump to the budget review.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember, while Scott Sanders is coming forward, just a reminder, you have on your agenda tonight the public hearing for approval of the budget. It is what I would characterize as a maintenance budget. It's the second of a 2-year budget that you approved last year, so we should be in good shape. Mr. Sanders has an overview of all of the information that we've presented thus far and is included in the budget, so that's Scott.
Good morning, Mayor, Council members. Scott Sanders, Finance Director, and looks like we're good to go. So this morning, this is the budget review and wrap-up, if you will. So this is the, like City Manager Clark mentioned, this is the second year of a 2-year plan. The elements that you're going to see in this review, there's nothing new. It truly is a wrap-up of the other 5 workshop conversations that we've had. Status quo, if you will, on the service levels that were anticipated. So this was just meant for one last wrap-up and opportunity for you to ask questions if you have those. So with that, I'll get started. So at the highest level, the 2014 budget is being proposed with no tax rate change. The 1692 rate for the city would remain the same. There is no additional action necessary on utility rates. There are multi-year increases that were established last year for both the storm and the sanitary. Those were necessary to address the capital needs in each of those areas, and there'll be a couple bullet points that address those. Again, second year plan. And I think at this point, this is the second time that the City Council has a 2-year plan. And so it's pretty evident the benefits in this process in the second year allow for a smoothing period, if you will, where we're not coming to you every year with significant cuts and requests for rate changes and that sort. So I would hope that with your comments and your essentially comments back to us, that it would be supportive that we would continue on this path of 2-year budget cycles. The 2014 operating budget is balanced. That's including the general fund with the transfers into the road use. That's our general operating. The capital improvement program was designed to allow for a small decrease in the debt service rate so that it could accommodate increases in the operating rate associated with the pension fund increases. So as the debt service rate was able to come down about 12 cents, the benefit levy did need to go up about that same amount. Now, at this point, we do not have a final ruling or costing of the franchise fee litigation. That continues to move forward, and I'm sure we'll have further conversations as that becomes finalized as well. So I have a couple slides left here, the first of which is on the operating budget. Again, at another workshop setting, we presented to you the status of the budget cuts that were approved a year ago. We're at 92% complete with only 3 positions left that need to be removed from the budget. 2 of those 3 positions are due to retirements, so they will be vacated in the next couple months due to retirements. But there will be 1 additional layoff that will be looked at in about 6 to 8 months. The total cost for the wages and health care have been kept under control. And in fact, the growth rate for the last year's negotiations and what appears to be through this point in this year's negotiations are that the cost for the wages and health care will actually stay under the rate of inflation. So that's pretty impressive, and that's due to the partnership and the ability to work with those bargaining units that we have at the city. We have an implementation in the budget for supervisor training. This is a new program area that Human Resources is leading up. This will be very helpful in the city's approach to the ability to promote from within, to get individuals to training so that they can progress through the organization. That's something that we identified as a strong need at the city. So I can tell you that a lot of us are looking forward to having that training available to our city employees. The creation of a development office. This is to coordinate the fundraising needs at the city. And this is very different than what we have today in that we are often approached by members of the community with projects. And at that point, we're looking at having to put matches together. This will kind of work it the other way, where the city identifies needs and then has city resources available to do the fundraising and see if there are private entities that would like to participate in funding different projects. So this is a great opportunity for the city as well. And then lastly, the automated traffic enforcement. That was explained at a workshop earlier, that the funds are first used, obviously, to cover the costs of the program. But then secondly, we've gone into an area of using some of the automated traffic enforcement revenues for public safety needs. I think you heard about the burglary detail and the additional cost that was necessary to address that public safety need. The decision was made to use the ATE funds for that. And so we've used that for temporary public safety needs. And then lastly, as the council becomes comfortable with that revenue being stable and there for long term, then those funds could be used for potentially annual needs that we would at that point become more dependent on using those sources. But at this point, we have not done that. So that's the operating portion. Lastly, I have a few highlights on the capital portion of our budgets. Again, this is information that was shared at workshop. We have ADA improvements that are within our capital improvement plan and have had for a few years. We were looking at about $16.7 million in additional costs that have been identified, and that includes the last 2 or 3 years as well. We have the sewer separation projects, which I've spoken to you at length. We've had we've got a $275 million cost estimate, and that's between both the city's side of that and the WRA's. And my understanding is we're about a third of the way through that program as well. We have the flood protection improvements, dealing with levee improvements and bridge restrictions. So we're looking at about $20 million investment in that area as well. We have citywide studies that are underway with the library and parking, aquatic center, pools, and then also the need for fire station expansions. All these programs are meant to look at needs that are being identified, assist in finding appropriate locations, and then knowing what the operating cost, if any, would be for each of these. We have a comprehensive office space study item in the capital improvement plan. That's really to address the utilization of space in City Hall, the Armory, and the police station, understanding how the public interacts with staff and how different departments need to be able to better interact with each other. We are continuing to research and try and identify funding sources for the Municipal Service Center, future phases. I believe there's an item on the council agenda for continuing in phase 1, but we in finance need to really put in front of you what the options are for continuing the Municipal Service Center advancement. There are a lot of efficiencies that can still be gained in the future phases of that project. So it's very important that we put in front of you what funding options may become available. And lastly, we continue to need to focus on our partners up at the state and in some instances the federal government in providing local services, whether that be housing or grant funds through CDBG. So that was
you
it.
mentioned on that mandate, the $275 million, you said we're about a third of the way through that. Was this the original cost, or is this what remains? The
No,
$275?
that would be the total cost, including over $100 million that's been spent. And so on tonight's agenda, there will be the hearing for the budget and the approval of the budget, as well as there are separate items for the amending of the current budget, 2014 budget, and the capital. Those are 3 separate items. Mayor.
Scott, anybody have anything else for Scott? Christine?
A question. Scott, and I had a list of questions that staff got back to me on, so I appreciate that very much. But one that I see that we're continuing to spend quite a significant amount on the wellness program, and I support that. However, it's very subjective. I'd really like to figure out, or I'd like to have us identify quantifiable benchmarks to justify the increased expenses that we have there.
Okay.
I just think that it's, it's nice, it's a feel-good, but until we can tie it to the healthcare cost and some other key indicators in there, I would have to challenge us on the money that we're putting towards that program.
Okay.
The other item would be on Office of Economic Development. I believe we've made some staff, we moved a staff person to, we're moving some staff people there that was not originally in the budget.
I could try on that one, Scott, council members. There's been 2 significant changes. One is with the addition of Matt Anderson, we had a senior position, I think it was Economic Development Administrator. That position has been eliminated, so there's been one downsizing in that regard because Matt's been able to take over that responsibility and also be an assistant. We've also shifted a position from the CD department. That's Aaron Olson Douglas is now working in OED, but it's a lateral change. It wasn't an addition to the bottom line of the budget. We just shift the appropriation from one department to another.
Okay, thank you.
And then on your first question, we'll be sure to work with HR in identifying for you the different costs for each area of the wellness program. I think what needs to be made clear is that there are, part of the wellness program is now the incentives for different bargaining units to participate in.
And have a reduced.
Exactly.
Yeah, for healthcare.
Yeah, and so that's an important element now of the wellness program, so we need to make sure we identify those differences for you.
Okay, thank you.
Scott, before you take off here, one of your points on the 13-14 budget highlights was the capital improvement program will allow for a reduction in debt service, which also then allows us to have more dollars, I guess, for the operating side to pick up some of those other expenses. I have sort of a uneasy feeling about that, thinking that that's a long-term plan. Although I noticed tonight we have a significant amount of sale of debt, and I'm assuming a lot of that's refinancing.
No, that would be the new money portion that we issue each year.
So significant numbers, and hopefully as a result of the cost of money today, that won't be a huge, at least on the interest rate side of it, obligation. But the thing that worries me long term is that, you know, we're sort of assuming that everything's going to continue at these kinds of rates, and that inflation is not going to eat it up and then also drive rates higher. You know, I could see rates, instead of being in the 2 to 3, 4%, kicking back up to the 5 to the 6 to the 7%, let's say over the next 4 to 10 years.
Right. Understand that with debt service issuances, we're able to plan out further than we are with operating.
Right.
So we're able to put conservative rates in for future bond issues, and I do that at every opportunity. And so just as an example, we know that we're going to need to borrow around $26 million 18 months from now. And so I will put in a debt service schedule that includes about 100 basis points or another 1% increase to rates between now and then. And so I'm able to schedule out and then additional higher rates for years beyond that. So I'm able to look at where rates are today and get a pretty good feel that we are at risk of higher rates a year from now, 2 years from now, and 3 years from now, and schedule that in. And so when I looked at the debt service rate and what that capacity was, it's at $4.22 today, and we're looking to bring that down in this budget to $4.10, a 12-cent drop. And we'll be able to actually lower a few more pennies next year, which is anticipated to be the highest contribution rate year for pension funds. And then as the contribution funds start to come back down, the debt service rate will fluctuate between 4.10 and 4.15. So I feel pretty good about being able to plan for our capital improvement plan of around $26 million in borrowing a year. If that starts to change, then you may hear my story about what the rate would need to be changed. But I've anticipated higher borrowing rates within these numbers.
All right, and continue to anticipate the capital needs at a certain level.
Right. That will be the biggest challenge, is keeping that under control.
Mr. Manager.
If I could just add to Scott's response, Mr. Mayor, council members, there are two sort of high-level points I think that your question suggests. One is our ability to spend money on capital improvements on this city is constrained by the very budget revenue sources that we have at our disposal. And at the rates that we're going now and our budget constraints, in my view, we probably don't spend enough on infrastructure, generally speaking. The budget you have before you is relatively conservative. I think Scott's made that clear. But the point you're raising about our ability to finance long-term infrastructure is right on target. The other thing that's happening, and you correctly pointed out, is that we have really managed our capital expenses in such a way that our debt service levy rate is going down, which allows our operating levies to go up a little bit. And that's allowed us to maintain the tax rate at the same level, which has been a goal of this council. But that dynamic is going on as well, and it's one of the things that we've used to manage our budget going forward. But the byproduct of all that is that we're probably not spending long-term enough on infrastructure as a city.
So what would be that number? I mean, we're talking $26 million. So if we were to do what we need to do, what would be the ideal number?
I think we would really have to come back to you to talk about the individual needs of street improvements, of parks, and get into each of those further.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could answer that question either. But our feeling is that as you go through the budget process and you look at the individual categories, whether it's a street or a sewer or a municipal building or a park or whatever it is, we know there's a lot of unmet needs out there. And so we go through the process and we present to you what's most critical in our judgment. But we know darn well that there's things that we're not doing that we ought to be doing as a city long-term wise. It's a long-term issue. We're not going to solve it in the context of this particular situation. But as we talk in the legislature about the need to diversify our revenues, and one of the reasons for that is the need we know is there to spend more money on infrastructure going forward.
And I would even add that the capital improvement plan also has large equipment in it. So some of our vehicles are very expensive as well. So that would be part of the need as well.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Let's quickly have a legislative update.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll make it extremely quick for you. I've got a little sheet here with the summary of some bills that are being watched. Good news is that it's slowed down a little bit up at the Capitol with the blizzard that never was last week and people leaving town. The bill rate of introductions is actually somewhat slower than 2011, which was the first session of the last General Assembly. The most important, I think, bill on your sheet is the House Study Bill 150. That's the governor's property tax bill. This is his third version in 3 years. The good news is that there are a number of positive changes from previous years that the governor had produced for us to review. The first, I'll go through those real briefly. The first is a backfill that, if actually funded, will provide a reimbursement for most of the city's losses in the first 4 years. The bill still has a commercial and industrial rollback, but instead of 40%, that rollback is now a 20% rollback. Another positive is that the rollback is a standing, the backfill is a standing appropriation that can only be removed affirmatively instead of having the legislature having to vote it in each year. And finally, the backfill is not subject to across-the-board budget cuts in the event of a budget downturn. There are several concerns that remain with the proposal, however, and we're working to improve the bill and hopefully alleviate some of those concerns. Among those, the full backfill in the bill is only guaranteed, to the extent it's ever guaranteed, by the standing appropriation through the first 4 years. After that, it's capped then at the maximum of the fiscal year 2017 appropriation level. Thereafter, the maximum for any given year will be the amount from 2017. It will be prorated to the different taxing districts. So you've got a problem where the backfill can be eliminated at any time by affirmative vote of the legislature, and even if it's not eliminated, the backfill will greatly diminish over time. The other problems with the bill, that, as we see it, include a limit on the growth of assessed valuation. The limit is a 2% growth factor, or the lower of residential, agricultural, commercial, or industrial property growth. Scott Sanders tells us that industrial growth grows significantly more slowly than the other classes statewide, if it grows at all. So that means, obviously, this would greatly reduce city revenues by further artificially compressing and reducing assessed property values. Finally, we have concerns with the way TIF is treated. There's no special protection for TIF, and in fact, there could be some disadvantaged portions with respect to the increment in the event of any proration. There are a number of other bills on there. I won't go through those given the time, but I'm happy, as always, to visit with any of you after the workshop. Give me a call if you have any questions.
Anybody have anything quickly to ask?
Could we get the figures as to how much revenue we're talking about if the rollback is 20%? Because it seems to me it'd be about $14 million a year we would lose in business property tax if it's rolled back 20%.
Scott, sure. Scott knows that off the top of his head.
Scott Sanders, Finance Director. In the analysis that I put together, in the 10th year when this gets fully phased in, you can see the full impacts. There's a $30 million loss of revenue with an anticipation of $11 million of that being backfilled. So 18.8 million is a fairly certain loss, with another 11 million that if you believe the backfill will still be there, you'd have it, but otherwise you wouldn't, and it'd be a $30 million loss.
Anything else? Let's quickly ask if anybody in the public has any comments, questions, requests for clarification. Seeing none, let's call this meeting adjourned.